The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in September, carried by a mail carrier who had no idea she was delivering a piece of the past that refused to stay buried. Captain James Sullivan, retired, stood in the doorway of his small ranch house on the outskirts of San Antonio, Texas. The sun had barely cleared the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rust, colors that reminded him too much of desert sand and burning metal. His hands, weathered and scarred from 40 years of working with steel, trembled slightly as he held the yellow envelope. Not from age, not from weakness, from recognition. The postmark, it was impossible. Iraq, February 1991. 33 years old, yet the paper felt fresh, the ink still dark. Sullivan's throat tightened. He knew what this meant before he even opened it. The past doesn't send letters unless it has something important to say. Inside his small kitchen, coffee grew cold in its pot. The morning news played on a television nobody was watching. His grandson Tyler, 17 years old and full of dreams about West Point, had already left for school. The house was silent except for the tick of a clock on the wall, each second falling like a hammer on an anvil. Sullivan's fingers worked the envelope open with the careful precision of a man who had spent years handling explosives. What fell out first was a photograph. Four men in desert camouflage, standing in front of an M1 Abrams tank, faces young and hard and alive with the kind of confidence that only comes before you've seen what war really does. He recognized himself immediately. 29 years old, lean and fierce, eyes that hadn't yet learned to flinch at sudden noises. Next to him stood Robert Hendricks, who everyone called Bull because he was built like one and had the temper to match. Then Victor Kowalski, skinny as a rail but stronger than he looked, always with grease under his fingernails and a joke on his lips. And there, on the far left, Captain David Morrison, dark hair, easy smile, holding a photograph within the photograph. Sullivan knew that picture in Morrison's hand. It was a snapshot of Morrison's son, Alex, 3 years old then, bright eyes and gap-toothed grin. Sullivan's vision blurred. He blinked hard, forcing his eyes to focus, forcing himself to look at the back of the photograph. Someone had written there in handwriting he didn't recognize. Young handwriting, angry handwriting. The words cut like shrapnel. Dad said, if you're reading this, he's dead and you forgot your promise. I'm 17. I need you. Alex. Below that, an address. El Paso Juvenile Detention Center. The photograph slipped from Sullivan's fingers, landing face up on the kitchen table. Morrison's smile stared at him like an accusation, like a ghost asking why it took 33 years to remember. Sullivan sank into a chair. His chest felt tight, like someone had strapped a band of steel around his ribs and was slowly turning the crank. The kitchen seemed to shrink around him, walls pressing in, the air growing thin. He hadn't thought about the promise in decades, had buried it so deep beneath layers of guilt and whiskey and forced forgetfulness that it had become something less than memory, more like a scar covered by new skin. But scars don't disappear. They just wait for the right moment to tear open again. His phone was in his hand before he consciously decided to reach for it. Muscle memory, the same instinct that had once guided him through sandstorms and artillery fire. His fingers found the contact he hadn't called in 8 years. The phone rang 4 times. Then a voice, rough as gravel in a bucket, answered with a single word that was more growl than greeting. What? Sullivan closed his eyes, took a breath, spoke 2 words that changed everything. It's time. 300 miles north, in a town called Livingston, Montana, Robert Hendricks stood behind the counter of his gun range, watching a group of young veterans practice their aim downrange. The sound of gunfire echoed through the building, a rhythm as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. Comfortable, predictable, safe. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He ignored it. Phones meant problems. Phones meant people wanted something from you. At 64 years old, Bull Hendricks had learned that the best way to deal with problems was to not answer the damn phone. But it rang again, and on the 4th call, something in his gut twisted. That old combat instinct, the one that told you when to duck, when to run, when something was wrong. He pulled the phone out, saw the name, Sullivan. They hadn't spoken in 8 years, not since Bull's second wife left him, and he'd gotten drunk enough to call Sullivan at 3 in the morning, crying about things that men their age weren't supposed to cry about. Sullivan had listened, hadn't judged, had just stayed on the line until Bull fell asleep with the phone still pressed to his ear. Bull answered. What? Sullivan's voice came through the speaker, quiet but firm, The voice of a man who had made a decision and wouldn't be talked out of it. It's time. 2 words. That was all it took. Bull understood immediately. In the language they shared, forged in fire and blood, in the kind of brotherhood that civilians could never quite comprehend, those 2 words carried more weight than an entire conversation. Bull looked down at the counter, at the bottle of bourbon he kept underneath it, at the purple heart medal he used as a paperweight, at the photograph tacked to the wall behind him. 4 men, 1 tank, a promise written in sand that had blown away in the first wind. He cleared his throat. When he spoke, his voice was steadier than he expected. Where? El Paso. Tomorrow. Bring your gear. The line went dead. Bull stood there for a long moment, listening to the gunfire downrange. Then he walked to the range door and flipped the sign from open to closed. The young veterans looked at him in confusion. Bull just pointed toward the exit. Out, everyone out, now. They filed out, grumbling but obedient. When the last one left, Bull locked the door, walked back to his office, pulled out a duffel bag that hadn't been touched in a decade, started filling it with things he swore he'd never need again. His hands didn't shake, not anymore. Whatever tremor might have been there was drowned out by something stronger. Purpose, the kind that only comes when you have been wandering in the dark for years and someone finally turns on a light. In a small house on the outskirts of Cleveland, Ohio, Victor Kowalski sat beside his wife's bed and held her hand while she slept. Maria Kowalski had always been small, but cancer had made her smaller still. 78 pounds now, skin like tissue paper stretched over bird bones. The hospice nurse said it would be weeks, maybe days. Her breathing was shallow, each inhale a labor, each exhale a surrender. Wrench, as everyone had called him since boot camp, didn't cry. He had already cried enough to fill an ocean. Now there was just a vast emptiness inside him, a hollow place where fear and grief had burned themselves out and left only ash. His phone buzzed on his bedside table. He almost didn't check it. Maria stirred in her sleep, made a small sound like a kitten. Wrench squeezed her hand gently, waiting until her breathing steadied again. Then he looked at the phone. Sullivan, text message. Tomorrow. El Paso. Morrison's son needs us. The promise. Wrench stared at the message for a full minute, read it 3 times, felt something crack open in his chest, not grief this time. Something else, something that felt almost like hope, which was worse than grief because hope was dangerous, and grief at least you could plan around. He typed back with one hand, the other still holding Maria's. I can't, Maria. The reply came in seconds. Bring her. We'll make it work. Wrench looked at his wife, at the woman who had stood beside him for 41 years, who had listened to his nightmares without flinching, who had never once asked him to be anything other than what he was. A man who fixed broken things, a man who kept promises, even the ones that hurt. He leaned forward and kissed her forehead, whispered against her skin, I have to go do something. I'll be back soon, I promise. Maria's eyes fluttered open, pale blue, cloudy with morphine, but still sharp enough to see straight through him. Her voice was barely a whisper, each word an effort. The brothers. He nodded, couldn't speak. Tears burned behind his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. Not now, not when she needed him to be strong. Maria's lips curved into something almost like a smile. Go, finish it. She closed her eyes again, drifted back into sleep. Wrench sat there for another 10 minutes, memorizing the way her hand felt in his, the pattern of her breathing, the way strands of gray hair fell across her pillow. Then he stood, kissed her one more time, walked to the closet and pulled out a bag he'd packed years ago, just in case the phone ever rang with orders he couldn't refuse. He called the hospice nurse, explained he had to leave for a few days, made sure Maria would have someone with her every hour. Then he walked out to his truck, threw the bag in the back, and started driving south. The road stretched out before him like a sentence he'd already written, but hadn't yet read aloud. El Paso, Texas sits on the border like a scar across the earth. A city built from dust and determination, where languages blend and cultures collide, and the sun burns hot enough to make mirages dance on the horizon. The juvenile detention center sat on the east side of town, surrounded by chain-link fence and razor wire. A place designed to hold people who had nowhere else to go. Kids too angry for foster care, too broken for traditional jail, caught in the space between childhood and consequence. Sullivan arrived first. He parked his truck in the visitor lot and sat there for 20 minutes, engine off, windows down, letting the September heat bake into his skin, punishing himself, preparing himself. He wasn't sure which. Bull's truck pulled in next. Big Ford F-250, primer gray, dented from years of hard use. Bull climbed out slowly, moving like a man whose body remembered every fall, every fight, every hard landing. He wore jeans and a black t-shirt stretched tight across a chest that had gone from muscle to something softer, but no less solid. His beard was gray now, shot through with white, but his eyes were the same, hard as flint. They looked at each other across the parking lot, didn't speak, didn't need to. Bull walked over, stood beside Sullivan's truck, looked up at the detention center like it was enemy territory. Wrench arrived last, driving a Honda Civic that seemed too small for him, even though he'd always been the skinny one. He parked and got out, and both Sullivan and Bull saw it immediately. The weight loss, the hollow eyes, the way he moved like someone who was holding himself together with willpower and duct tape. Sullivan stepped forward, put a hand on Wrench's shoulder. "How is she?" Wrench's jaw worked. He stared at the ground. "Weeks, maybe less." Bull spat into the dirt, not from disrespect, from fury, from the helpless rage that comes when you can't fight the enemy because the enemy is time and biology and the cruelty of the universe. "Then what the hell are you doing here?" Wrench looked up, met Bull's eyes, keeping a promise. The three men stood there in the parking lot, forming a triangle without realizing it. The same formation they'd held 33 years ago, standing beside their tank in the desert, swearing an oath to a dying friend. Sullivan pulled out of the photograph, held it so all three could see. Morrison's face stared back at them, frozen in a moment before everything went wrong. Bull's voice was rough. "I pulled the trigger. I killed him." Sullivan shook his head. "I gave the order." Wrench spoke quietly. "I heard him on the radio. Heard him say American. I didn't tell you." They stood in silence, each man carrying his own piece of guilt, his own shard of broken glass lodged too deep to remove. Finally, Sullivan folded the photograph and put it back in his pocket. "We all killed him. Now we finish what we started." They walked toward the detention center entrance together. Three old men in civilian clothes, backs straight despite the pain, moving with the synchronized precision of soldiers who had spent too many months cramped in a steel box together. Their shadows stretched long behind them in the afternoon sun. Inside the detention center, the air conditioning was broken, and the smell of industrial cleaner fought a losing battle against the stink of too many teenage bodies in too small a space. A guard led them through 3 sets of locked doors, each one clanging shut with the finality of a coffin lid. The visiting room was small, gray walls, metal table bolted to the floor, plastic chairs that would break if you tried to use them as weapons. A camera in the corner, red light blinking. Sullivan, Bull, and Wrench sat on one side of the table and waited. The door opened. A young man shuffled in, wrists cuffed in front of him, wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on his frame. The guard uncuffed him and left, locking the door behind him. Alex Morrison was 35 years old but looked 50. His face was hard planes and sharp angles, carved by years of violence and hunger, and whatever you became when nobody gave a damn whether you lived or died. Tattoos crawled up his neck, prison ink, crude and deliberative. His eyes were dark, suspicious, measuring the three old men like they were potential threats or potential marks. But there was something else there too, something in the set of his jaw, the way he held his shoulders, something that looked exactly like his father. He sat down across from them, didn't speak, just waited. Sullivan pushed the photograph across the table. Face up, Alex looked down at it. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, pain, anger. All of it locked down tight because in places like this, showing emotion was showing weakness. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough from cigarettes and shouting, and years of swallowing everything that hurt. "You're late. About 33 years late." Bull leaned forward, his massive hands flat on the table. "Your father asked us to look after you. We failed. We're here to make it right." Alex laughed. It was an ugly sound, brittle, full of broken edges. "Make it right. My mom remarried when I was 8. Guy beat the shit out of me every day for 6 years. I ran away at 14, lived on the streets, joined the army at 18 because I thought maybe I could find out who my dad really was. 3 tours, Iraq and Afghanistan. You know what I learned?" He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "I learned my dad died for nothing. Got blown up in a tank because somebody made a mistake. Friendly fire. They told my mom he was a hero, but he was just unlucky. And the 3 men who promised to take care of me, They forgot I existed. The words hit like punches, each one accurate, each one deserved. Sullivan felt them land in his chest, felt the old wound tear open wider. Wrench spoke quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made Alex pause. Your father died trying to do the right thing. We failed him. We failed you. We can't change that. But we can help you now. Alex's sneer faltered. He looked at Wrench, really looked, and saw something there. Maybe the exhaustion, maybe the pain, maybe just the truth. Why should I believe you? Because we came. 33 years late, but we came. The silence stretched out. In the corner, the camera kept recording. Outside, somewhere in the building, someone was shouting. The sounds of confinement, of cages. Alex pulled a different photograph from his pocket. The guard had let him keep it because it was the only thing he owned that mattered. He placed it on the table beside the old photo of his father. It showed a young woman in army fatigues, standing at attention, face serious under a patrol cap. Pretty in a way that suggested toughness underneath. Dark hair, Morrison's eyes. This is Emma, my daughter, 19 years old. The only good thing I ever did in my entire worthless life. He tapped the photo with one finger. She enlisted 8 months ago, made it through basic, made it through AIT. She's a tank driver, M1 Abrams, like her grandfather. She doesn't know him, doesn't know the story. I never told her because I didn't want her to know her family is cursed. Sullivan picked up the photo carefully, like it was something precious. Studied the young woman's face. Saw Morrison there. Saw something else too. Determination, strength. The look of someone who had decided to be better than their circumstances. Where is she stationed? Fort Hood. She deploys in 3 weeks. Training mission in Poland, near the Ukraine border. Bull grunted. Dangerous area. Things heating up over there. Alex nodded, his hands clenched into fists on the table. That's why I need you. Emma doesn't know what she's getting into. She's good, she's smart, but she's 19 and she thinks the army is going to be like it is in the commercials. She needs someone to teach her the truth. Someone who's been in the shit and came out the other side. He looked at each of them in turn. She needs tank commanders. Real ones. The kind who know what it means when the radio goes dead and the thermals fail and you're alone in a steel box with death trying to get in through every crack. Sullivan set the photograph down gently. We'll do it. We'll go to Fort Hood. We'll teach her everything we know. Alex's expression cracked. Just for a second. Just long enough to show the scared father underneath the prison hard exterior. Why? Why would you do this? You don't owe me anything. Wrench reached across the table, placed his hand over Alex's. The gesture was so unexpected, so gentle, that Alex froze. Yes, we do. We owe you 33 years. We owe you a childhood. We owe you a father who came home. We can't give you those things, but we can make sure Emma has what you didn't. Alex's eyes went wet. He blinked hard, twice, forcing the tears back. In this place, tears were blood in the water. Sullivan stood. Bull and Wrench followed. We leave for Fort Hood tomorrow. We'll find Emma. We'll teach her. And when she deploys, she'll be ready. Not just trained, ready. He picked up both photographs, held them side by side. Father and granddaughter, past and future. Separated by death and time and all the ways the world breaks people who deserve better. Your father asked us to take care of you. We failed. We won't fail Emma. Alex stood too. For a moment, the 5 feet between them felt like 5 miles. Then Alex reached out, offered his hand. Sullivan took it. Then Bull, then Wrench. Each handshake a promise. Each grip a contract written in something stronger than words. The guard came to take Alex back to his cell. At the door, Alex turned around one more time. Tell Emma that her grandfather was a hero. Not because he died in a tank, but because he tried to do the right thing even when it cost him everything. Sullivan nodded. We'll tell her. The door closed. The lock clicked. The 3 old men stood in the empty visiting room, surrounded by gray walls and the weight of promises kept too late and promises that couldn't wait any longer. Bull broke the silence first. So we're really doing this. Teaching a 19-year-old girl how to survive a war that hasn't started yet. Wrench smiled. It was tired but genuine. Beats sitting around waiting to die. Sullivan pulled out his phone, started making calls. They would need clearance to get on Fort Hood, would need to coordinate with Emma's unit, would need to move fast because 3 weeks wasn't much time to prepare someone for what waited in the dark places where peace ends and survival begins. But they had done harder things, had done impossible things, had kept each other alive through sandstorms and artillery, and the kind of fear that turned brave men into animals. This was just one more mission, one more promise to keep. They walked out of the detention center together, back into the brutal Texas sun. The parking lot shimmered with heat. In the distance, the Franklin Mountains rose against the sky like broken teeth. Bull unlocked his truck but didn't get in. Instead, he pulled out a flask, took a long drink, passed it to Wrench, who drank and passed it to Sullivan. Sullivan held the flask up to the light. The liquid inside caught the sun, turned to amber fire. To Morrison, we're coming to finish it. He drank. The whiskey burned going down, burned like desert sand, burned like guilt, burned like the promise of redemption that might be real or might be just another lie. You tell yourself to make the weight bearable. But it was something, and something was more than they'd had in 33 years. They climbed into their vehicles. 3 trucks, 3 men, 3 pieces of a machine that had been disassembled decades ago and was now grinding back to life. Sullivan started his engine, looked at the photograph on his dashboard. Morrison and his son, frozen in time, waiting for promises to be kept. He put the truck in gear and pulled out of the parking lot. Behind him, Bull and Wrench followed, a convoy of ghosts heading toward Fort Hood, toward a girl who didn't know she was the answer to prayers her grandfather prayed in his last moments, toward one last chance to make something right in a world that had been wrong for far too long. The sun beat down on the highway. The miles stretched ahead, and in the rearview mirror, El Paso grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely, leaving only the road and the heat and the 3 men who refused to let the past stay buried. Because some promises don't have an expiration date. Some debts don't get forgiven just because time passes. Some brothers don't stop being brothers just because one of them is dead. They drove through the afternoon and into the evening, watching the landscape change from desert to scrubland to the rolling hills of central Texas. They stopped once for gas and bad coffee, didn't talk much, didn't need to. The silence between them was comfortable, familiar. The kind of quiet that only comes when you've shared a foxhole or a tank or the moment right before everything goes to hell. Night fell. Stars emerged, cold and distant and indifferent. Sullivan drove with his windows down, letting the wind tear through the truck cab, clearing out the cobwebs and the doubts and the voice in his head that kept asking if this was really going to work or if they were just 3 old men chasing a ghost. His phone rang. Tyler, his grandson. Sullivan almost didn't answer. Then he thought about Morrison, about promises and time and the way regret compounds like interest on a debt you can never repay. He answered, "Grandpa? Where are you? You weren't home for dinner." Tyler's voice was young and strong and full of the absolute certainty that the world made sense and people did what they said they would do. Sullivan's throat tightened. "I'm on the road. Had to help some old friends. I'll be back in a few weeks. Is everything okay?" Sullivan looked at the photograph on his dashboard, at Morrison's smile, at the ghost of a promise that had waited 33 years to be kept. Yeah, everything's going to be okay. He hoped it was true. Hoped it hard enough that maybe, if there was any justice in the universe, hope alone could make it real. They reached Fort Hood just after midnight. The base was dark except for perimeter lights and guard towers. Sullivan pulled up to the visitor gate. A young MP, couldn't be more than 22, leaned out of the guardhouse. "Can I help you, sir?" Sullivan handed over his military ID. Retired, but still valid. "Captain James Sullivan, retired. Here to see Specialist Emma Morrison. I have clearance." The MP checked his computer, frowned, checked again, then nodded. "You're cleared, sir, but visiting hours don't start until 0800. We'll wait." The MP waved them through. They parked in an empty lot near the barracks, killed their engines, sat in the dark, listening to the sounds of a base at night. Distant generator hum, cicadas, the occasional shout from some drill sergeant running a midnight training exercise because the Army never sleeps, and soldiers need to learn that rest is a privilege, not a right. Bull climbed out of his truck and walked over to Sullivan's, leaned against the hood. "You think she'll listen to us?" 19-year-olds don't exactly take advice from senior citizens. Wrench joined them, carrying 3 bottles of water from a cooler in his truck, handed them out. "She'll listen. She's Morrison's blood. Morrison always listened." Sullivan took a drink. The water was warm but wet, and that was enough. "We don't give her a choice. We show up. We teach. We stay until she's ready." Bull grunted. "And if she tells us to go to hell?" Sullivan smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had made a decision and would see it through even if it killed him. Then we go to hell, but we take her with us first. Show her what it looks like. So when she sees it for real, she'll know how to get back out. They sat there in the dark, three old men preparing for a battle that didn't involve bullets or explosions, but was no less dangerous. Because teaching someone to survive meant teaching them that death was always present, always patient, always waiting for the moment you forgot to be afraid. And fear was a weapon, a tool, a gift that kept you alive when training failed and luck ran out, and all you had left was the certainty that you weren't ready to die today. The night stretched on, stars wheeled overhead. Time moved the way it always does, second by second, inexorable, uncaring. And in a barracks 300 yards away, specialist Emma Morrison slept without knowing that three ghosts from her grandfather's past had arrived to keep a promise that should have been kept decades ago. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, the real training would begin. Tomorrow, the Steele brothers would teach her what her grandfather had learned in his last moments, that some promises are worth dying for, and some are worth living for. And the trick is knowing which is which before it's too late to choose. The sun rose over Fort Hood like a hammer coming down on an anvil, turning the Texas sky from black to blood orange to the pale blue that promised another day of heat that could break a weaker man. Sullivan woke in his truck with a stiff neck and the taste of old coffee in his mouth. Bull was already awake, doing push-ups in the parking lot, counting under his breath. Wrench sat on the tailgate of his Honda, phone pressed to his ear, speaking quietly to someone back in Ohio. Sullivan climbed out of his truck and stretched, feeling every one of his 62 years in his lower back and knees. Age wasn't something you noticed gradually. It was something that accumulated in silence and then presented its bill all at once, usually when you needed your body to do something it had once done without thinking. Wrench ended his call, walked over. His face was gray in the early light. Maria had a bad night. Nurse says maybe a week now. Sullivan put his hand on Wrench's shoulder. Squeezed. No words. What could you say that wasn't either a lie or a cruelty? Bull finished his push-ups and joined them, breathing hard but steady. We should get you back to Cleveland. Wrench shook his head. Maria told me to finish this. I finish it. At 0700, the base came alive. Soldiers emerged from barracks, moving in organized chaos toward morning formation. Drill sergeants barked orders. Boots hit pavement in synchronized rhythm. The smell of diesel fuel and gun oil, and the peculiar scent of an army base that was part institution, part machine, part living organism. They found the admin building and presented their credentials. A staff sergeant with tired eyes and too much paperwork looked at them like they were a problem he didn't have time to solve. Specialist Morrison is with 3rd Battalion, 2nd Brigade. They're at the tank range this morning, gunnery training. Sullivan smiled, not a friendly smile, the smile of a man who had outranked staff sergeants when this one was still in diapers. Then that's where we'll be. The staff sergeant started to object, saw something in Sullivan's eyes, and decided he had better things to do than argue with three old men who looked like they'd been carved from the same stone as the base itself. Range 12, take the perimeter road east. You'll hear it before you see it. He was right. They heard it 2 miles out. The deep bass thunder of 120mm smoothbore cannons firing. A sound you felt in your chest cavity. A sound that, once heard, became part of your permanent memory. Sullivan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Bull leaned forward in the passenger seat. Wrench, riding in back, closed his eyes, and for a moment he was 28 again. Sitting in the driver's seat of an M1, waiting for the order to move out. Range 12 was a vast expanse of cleared land with earthen berms and destroyed vehicle hulks serving as targets. 4 M1A2 Abrams tanks sat in firing positions, barrels elevated, exhaust shimmering in the heat. Soldiers in Nomex coveralls moved around the tanks like ants servicing their queen. Range control tower overlooked everything, windows reflecting the morning sun like watching eyes. Sullivan parked near the tower. The 3 men climbed out and stood there watching. A whistle blew. One of the tanks fired. The muzzle blast was a physical thing, a pressure wave that hit your chest like a fist. Downrange, a target vehicle erupted in dust and smoke. A voice called out from behind them. Female, young, authority wrapped in irritation. This is a restricted range. Civilians need to clear the area. Sullivan turned. The speaker was a lieutenant, maybe 25, with the kind of confidence that came from having bars on her collar, but not enough years under them to know what she didn't know. He held up his military ID. Captain Sullivan, retired. These are Master Sergeant Hendricks and Sergeant Kowalski, also retired. We have clearance to observe Specialist Morrison. The lieutenant checked her tablet, frowned, checked again. I don't have anything about observers, and we're running hot range exercises. This isn't a field trip for veterans looking to relive glory days. Bull took a step forward. Sullivan put a hand on his arm, held him back. The lieutenant was doing her job. You didn't get angry at people for doing their job. Call your battalion commander. Tell him Captain Sullivan is here per agreement with post command. We'll wait. The lieutenant made the call, spoke quickly, listened, and her expression changed from irritation to something closer to caution. She ended the call. Colonel says you're cleared, but you stay in the observation area and you don't interfere with training. Understood. They followed her to a shaded area with folding chairs and a cooler of water. From there, they had a clear view of all 4 tanks. The lieutenant pointed to the second tank from the left. That's Morrison's track. She's driver, good soldier, fast learner. Little too confident maybe, but that's not unusual for her age. Sullivan sat down, pulled out a small pair of binoculars, focused on the tank the lieutenant had indicated. The turret was rotated to 12 o'clock, barrel elevated 15 degrees. He could see the tank commander standing in the cupola hatch, head and shoulders visible. Young kid, maybe 23, crew cut, serious face. But Sullivan wasn't looking at him. He was looking at the driver's hatch, waiting. The tank fired again. Recoil rocked the 70-ton vehicle back slightly. The barrel returned to battery. Downrange, another target died in smoke and flame. Then the driver's hatch popped open and a soldier emerged, pulling herself up and out to check something on the forward hull. Even from 200 yards away, even with decades between them, Sullivan saw Morrison in her movements. The way she climbed, the efficiency of motion, the careful check of equipment that said she understood the machine was her life and you didn't trust your life to things you didn't verify yourself. Emma Morrison was small, 5'6" maybe, slim but clearly strong. Her face was dirty with a particular combination of dust and sweat and oil that came from living inside a tank. Dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore Nomex coveralls that were too big for her, sleeves rolled up, showing forearms that were corded with muscle. She finished her check and dropped back inside the driver's hole, pulling the hatch closed behind her. The tank rumbled to life, diesel engine roaring, and began backing up to reposition for the next firing iteration. Bull leaned over to Sullivan. She moves like she knows what she's doing. Wrench nodded. Drive smooth, no jerking. She feels the machine. They watched for 2 hours as the 4 tanks ran through their gunnery tables. Emma's tank performed well. Fast target acquisition, good accuracy, the kind of performance that came from a crew that worked together and trusted each other. During a break in the firing, the crews dismounted for maintenance checks. Emma emerged again, this time with tools, and began working on the track tension with her mechanic. They worked together efficiently, no wasted motion, communicating with gestures and the occasional word. Sullivan stood. Time to introduce ourselves. They walked across the range floor toward Emma's tank. The heat coming off the engine deck was intense, shimmering the air. The smell of burnt propellant and hot metal filled their nostrils. Sullivan felt something in his chest, not quite nostalgia, something deeper, cellular memory, his body remembering what it was like to live inside these machines, to become part of them. Emma looked up as they approached. Her expression went from curious to confused to suspicious in the span of 3 seconds. She glanced at her tank commander, who was talking with the range officer, then back at the 3 old men walking toward her like they had every right to be there. She stood, wiped her hands on a rag, waited. Sullivan stopped 10 feet away, close enough to talk, far enough to not be threatening. He'd done this before, approached young soldiers who didn't know they were about to have their world changed. Specialist Morrison, we need to talk. Emma's eyes narrowed. Her hand drifted toward the wrench on her tool belt. Not aggressive, defensive. The movement of someone who had learned early that strangers meant trouble. Who are you? Sullivan held up the photograph, the old one. 4 men in a tank. He pointed to the man on the left. That's your grandfather, Captain David Morrison. We served with him. 1st Platoon, 2nd Armored Cavalry, Desert Storm. Emma's expression didn't change, but Sullivan saw the micro-reactions, the slight widening of eyes. The breath held for just a second too long. She took the photograph with hands that were steady despite the tremor Sullivan could sense underneath. She studied it for a long time. When she looked up, her voice was harder. My grandfather died 33 years ago in a tank. Friendly fire. What do you want? Your father sent us. He asked us to teach you what your grandfather would have taught you if he'd lived. Emma's jaw tightened. She thrust the photograph back at Sullivan. My father is in jail. He's a junkie and a criminal, and I haven't spoken to him in 2 years. I don't need anything from him. And I sure as hell don't need 3 old men telling me how to do my job. She turned back to her maintenance work, dismissing them. Bull took a step forward, but Sullivan blocked him with an arm. This was delicate. Push too hard and she'd push back. Push too soft and she'd walk away. Your father loves you, whatever else he is, whatever mistakes he made, that's real. Emma spun back around. Her eyes were bright with anger now. Real anger. The kind that came from deep wounds poorly healed. You don't know anything about my father. You don't know what it's like growing up with everyone telling you your dad's a hero's son, but he can't stay out of jail long enough to show up for your high school graduation. You don't know what it's like joining the army because maybe if you're good enough at the same job that killed your grandfather, it'll somehow make sense of why your entire family is broken. Her voice cracked in the last word. She caught herself, locked it down, but not before Sullivan saw the pain underneath. The same pain he'd seen in Alex's eyes. The inheritance of trauma passed down like genetic code. Wrench spoke quietly. His voice carried a weight that made Emma pause. My wife is dying, stage 4 cancer, maybe a week left. I should be home with her. Instead, I'm here because I made a promise to your grandfather 33 years ago, and I broke it. I can't fix what happened to your father, but I can make sure you don't end up like him, broken because nobody taught you how to survive. Emma stared at Wrench, at the grief written plain on his face, at the truth of a man who was choosing between being with his dying wife and keeping a promise to a ghost. Why should I believe you? Bull pulled up his shirt sleeve. On his shoulder was a tattoo, faded now, green ink turned gray with age. It showed a tank with the number 1-2 on the turret. Below it, 4 names: Morrison, Sullivan, Hendricks, Kowalski. Sullivan showed his. Same tattoo, left shoulder. Wrench showed his, same place, same ink. Emma's expression shifted, not quite belief, not quite trust, but something close to consideration. What do you want from me? Nothing. We want to give you something. Knowledge, experience, the truth about what happens when the training stops and the real thing starts. Sullivan stepped closer, lowered his voice so only Emma could hear. You're deploying in 3 weeks to Poland, near Ukraine. You think that's just a training mission. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But if it goes wrong, if things heat up and suddenly you're not training anymore, you need to know how to keep yourself and your crew alive. The simulators don't teach you that. The manuals don't teach you that. Only people who've been there and survived can teach you that. Emma looked at each of them in turn. Sullivan saw her working through it, calculating, trying to decide if this was real or some kind of elaborate con. Finally, she spoke. My commander won't allow outside interference with training. Then we make it unofficial, after hours, off the books. You give us 3 weeks, we give you everything we know. What's in it for you? Redemption. The word hung in the air between them. Honest, brutal, true. Emma's tank commander called out, Morrison, 5 minutes. We're running the next table. Emma looked back at him, nodded, then she turned to Sullivan. I get off duty at 1800. There's a motor pool maintenance bay on the south side of base. Base 7. Meet me there. She didn't wait for an answer, just climbed back into her tank, pulled the hatch closed, and disappeared into the steel belly of the machine. Sullivan, Bull, and Wrench walked back to their vehicles in silence. When they reached the parking area, Bull was the first to speak. She's tougher than she looks. Sullivan nodded. She'd have to be. Morrison's bloodline. Wrench leaned against his truck. Did you see her hands? Calluses, scars. She works on that tank like her life depends on it. Because it does. She knows that. Even if she doesn't know, she knows it. They spent the afternoon in the base PX cafeteria, drinking bad coffee and going over notes. Sullivan had brought a notebook filled with lessons learned from Desert Storm. Bull had tactical scenarios memorized from dozens of engagements. Wrench had maintenance wisdom accumulated from 30 years of keeping machines alive under impossible conditions. At 17:30, they drove to the motor pool. Base 7 was a massive structure, big enough to fit 2 tanks inside with overhead cranes and tools covering every wall. The smell of oil and solvents was thick enough to taste. Industrial lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows. Emma was already there, sitting on a workbench, still in her Nomex coveralls, eating an MRE with the mechanical efficiency of someone who viewed food as fuel and nothing more. She looked up when they entered. "Close the bay door." Sullivan pulled the door down. The sound echoed like a cell closing. They were sealed in now. Private. Whatever happened here would stay here. Emma hopped off the workbench. "Okay, you've got 3 weeks to convince me you're not wasting my time. What's first?" Sullivan pulled out a toolbox from his truck. Inside were not tools but teaching aids. Maps, photographs, reports. The accumulated wisdom of men who had learned lessons written in blood. "First we figure out what you think you know. Then we show you what you don't." For the next 2 hours, Sullivan grilled Emma on everything. Tank operations, gunnery, communications, maintenance, navigation, emergency procedures. Emma answered every question with the confident precision of a soldier who had studied hard and believed the manuals were gospel. When Sullivan finished, he sat down on a workbench across from her. "You know the book answers. That's good. Books keep you alive in peacetime. But the book doesn't tell you what to do when your thermal sight dies in the middle of contact, when your radios go dead and you can't talk to your platoon, when your loader takes shrapnel and there's blood everywhere and you still have to keep fighting because stopping means dying." Emma's confidence wavered. "We train for those scenarios. You train simulations, clean, controlled, with reset buttons and observer controllers who stop the exercise if things get too real. We're going to train you for when there's no reset button and the only observer is God, and he's too busy to give you a safety brief." Bull stood up, walked to the center of the bay. His voice filled the space, loud and hard and uncompromising. "Pop quiz. You're driving, taking fire from the 2 o'clock position. Tank commander is dead. Gunner is in shock. Loader is trying to help the TC. What do you do?" Emma opened her mouth, closed it, thought hard. I would try to back up to cover while calling for help on the radio." "Wrong. You're dead now. Your entire crew is dead." Emma's face flushed with anger. "That's not fair. You didn't give me enough information. War doesn't give you information. War gives you chaos and terror, and 3 seconds to make a decision that determines whether you go home or go in a bag. There is no fair." Bull's voice was brutal but not cruel, hard but not hateful. The voice of a man who had watched good soldiers die because they hesitated or guessed wrong or believed that training would prepare them for every possibility. Emma stood up. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear, from fury. "Fine, tell me what's the right answer." Bull walked over, stood close enough that Emma had to look up to meet his eyes. "You don't back up. You accelerate, straight at the enemy. Close the distance so fast they can't adjust their aim. Then you run them over or get past them or create enough chaos that your supporting elements can engage. You become the weapon, not the target." He stepped back. "Rule 1, when you're getting hammered, don't retreat. Attack. Because retreating means you're predictable, and predictable means dead." Wrench spoke up from where he sat near a tool cart. "Rule 2, your tank is not a machine. It's a living thing. You feed it fuel and oil. You maintain its health. You listen to its sounds and know when something's wrong before the gauges tell you. The crews who survive are the ones who love their tanks like family." He pulled out a small notebook, flipped through pages covered in cramped handwriting and mechanical diagrams. "Every morning before you roll out, you do a full PMCS, not the abbreviated version, not the checklist where you mark yes, yes, yes without looking. You check every fitting, every hose, every connection, because the mission where you skip that check is the mission where a hydraulic line fails and your turret locks and you die because you can't shoot back." Emma listened, the anger in her face slowly shifting to something else. Not quite respect, but attention, real attention. Sullivan stood. "Rule 3, your crew is your family, closer than family. You breathe each other's air. You know their habits, their fears, their tells. When your gunner's hands start shaking before contact, you know he's scared, but he'll do his job anyway. When your loader makes jokes, you know he's terrified and using humor to cope. You learn this because when everything goes to hell and the radio's screaming and shells are cooking off and death is reaching for you, those 3 other people in that tank are the only thing between you and eternity." He pulled out another photograph. This one showed the inside of a destroyed tank, burned, twisted. Things that might have been equipment or might have been people. It was impossible to tell. This is what happens when crew cohesion fails, when trust breaks down, when someone panics and everyone dies because of it. Emma stared at the photograph. Her face had gone pale, but she didn't look away. Sullivan put the photo back in his folder. For the next 3 weeks, we're going to teach you how to survive. Not just operate, survive. Some of it will be technical. Most of it will be mental. Because the machine can be perfect, but if your head isn't right, you'll still die. They worked until midnight. Scenarios, drills, questions that had no good answers, only less bad ones. Emma absorbed it like someone dying of thirst taking water. She argued, she pushed back, she questioned, but she listened. When they finally called it for the night, Emma was exhausted, sweat-soaked, wrung out, but there was something different in her eyes, a seriousness that hadn't been there before. Same time tomorrow. Sullivan nodded. Same time, same place, every night for 3 weeks. Emma started to leave, stopped at the door, turned back. Why are you really doing this? And don't give me the redemption speech. Tell me the truth. Sullivan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 33 years of guilt. Because your grandfather asked me to take care of his son, and I forgot. I let Alex grow up alone and broken. I can't fix that. But maybe if I can teach you to survive, it'll mean Morrison's death wasn't for nothing. Maybe it'll mean the promise wasn't completely broken. Emma's expression softened, just slightly, just enough to show she understood. He was a hero, wasn't he? My grandfather. Yes. Not because he died in a tank, because he tried to do the right thing even when it cost everything. Emma nodded, opened the door and walked out into the Texas night. The 3 men sat in the maintenance bay in silence. Bull was the first to speak. She's good. Raw but good. Wrench agreed. She's got Morrison's instincts, but she's carrying a lot of anger. That can be useful or it can get her killed. Sullivan packed up his teaching materials. Then we teach her how to aim it. Anger is fuel. You just have to make sure it burns controlled, not wild. They drove back to their motel. Cheap place off base. 3 rooms, thin walls. The kind of place soldiers stayed when they had nowhere else to go. Sullivan lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the highway traffic through the window. His phone buzzed. Text from Tyler, his grandson. Grandpa, are you okay? When are you coming home? Sullivan typed back. I'm helping someone. I'll be home soon, I promise. He stared at the word promise for a long time before hitting send. The days blurred together after that. A routine established itself. Morning observation at the range, afternoon planning sessions, evening training in the maintenance bay. Each night they pushed Emma harder, taught her things the manuals didn't cover. The informal knowledge that got passed from veteran to rookie in the moments between official training. Week 1 focused on technical skills, advanced gunnery techniques, how to fire without thermals, how to navigate without GPS, how to perform field repairs with nothing but wire and profanity. Week 2 focused on tactics, how to read terrain, how to anticipate enemy movement, how to think like a hunter instead of prey. Bull ran her through scenarios until she could recite the proper responses in her sleep. Week 3 focused on the mental game, how to manage fear, how to make decisions under pressure, how to keep functioning when everything inside you wants to shut down and hide. One night during the 3rd week, Sullivan brought Emma to an empty field on the edge of base. The moon was full, casting shadows that looked like enemy positions. He handed her a pair of old binoculars. What do you see? Emma scanned the field. Nothing. Just empty ground. Look harder. Not with your eyes, with your instinct. Where would you hide if you wanted to ambush someone? Emma looked again. This time slower, more careful. She pointed to a slight depression near a tree line. There. It's not much, but it's enough to hide a vehicle hull down. Good. Now where else? She found 3 more positions, each one logical, each one dangerous. Sullivan lowered his own binoculars. Every piece of terrain is a puzzle. Cover, concealment, fields of fire, avenues of approach. You learn to read it like a language, because the enemy is reading it too. And if they read it better than you, they choose the battlefield and you die on their terms. Emma was quiet for a moment. Were you scared? In Desert Storm? Always, every single day. But you still did your job, because being scared and doing your job anyway is what courage actually is. Courage isn't not being afraid. Courage is being terrified and moving forward anyway because people depend on you. Emma looked out at the dark field. What if I freeze? What if when it's real I just Can't. Sullivan turned to face her. Then your crew will die. And you'll die, and it will be horrible and quick and final. So you train until the responses are automatic. Until your body does the job, even when your mind is screaming. You build the muscle memory so deep that panic can't override it. He put his hand on her shoulder. But you won't freeze. I've watched you for 3 weeks. You've got Morrison's blood. When the moment comes, you'll do what needs doing. On the 18th day, Wrench got the call he'd been dreading. Maria had slipped into a coma. The nurse said hours, not days. He stood in the motel parking lot at 3 in the morning, phone in his hand, face carved from stone. Sullivan and Bull found him there. They knew without being told. The weight of grief has its own language. Bull spoke first. Go, get on a plane, we'll finish here. Wrench shook his head. 3 more days. 3 more days and Emma deploys. I can't leave before it's done. Wrench, she's your wife. You need to be there. I need to keep my promise. Maria told me to finish this. She'll wait. She always waited. His voice broke on the last word. Bull grabbed him and pulled him into a hug that was more tackle than embrace. 2 old soldiers holding each other up in a parking lot at 3 in the morning, crying in the way that men cry when they have learned that tears don't make you weak, just human. Sullivan called the hospice nurse, asked her to sit with Maria, to hold her hand, to tell her that Wrench was coming, but he had to finish something first. The nurse's voice was gentle. I'll stay with her. She won't be alone. The last 3 days they trained with an intensity that bordered on desperation. Emma sensed something had changed but didn't ask. Just pushed harder, learned faster, absorbed everything they threw at her like her life depended on it. Because it did. On the final night, Sullivan brought out a bottle of whiskey. The good stuff. The kind you saved for special occasions or terrible ones. He poured 4 glasses, handed them out. Emma hesitated. I'm on duty tomorrow. Tonight you're not a soldier. Tonight you're family. They drank. The whiskey burned going down but warm from the inside. Sullivan raised his glass. To Morrison, who asked us to protect his son and we failed. We won't fail his granddaughter. Bull raised his glass. To the Steele brothers, past, present, and future. Wrench raised his glass. His voice was rough. To Maria, who understood that some promises are worth everything. Emma raised her glass last. Tears ran down her face, but her voice was steady. To my grandfather, I'll make you proud. They drank. And in that moment, in a maintenance bay at Fort Hood, a promise 33 years late was finally kept. Emma Morrison deployed on a Tuesday morning in October. The sky was overcast, threatening rain that never came. Her unit loaded their M1 Abrams tanks onto rail cars bound for the port. From there, ships would carry them across the Atlantic to Poland, to the edge of something that might stay peaceful or might explode into fire. Sullivan, Bull, and Wrench stood at the rail yard fence and watched. They weren't supposed to be there. This was a secure military deployment, but they'd learned decades ago that if you walked with enough authority, most people assumed you had permission. Emma saw them from across the yard, raised her hand, not a wave, a salute, combat sharp, holding it until Sullivan returned it with the same precision. Then she climbed into her tank and disappeared inside the steel hull. The hatch closed, the engine rumbled to life, and she was gone. Bull spoke first, voice rough. She'll be fine. We taught her good. Wrench nodded but said nothing. His phone had been silent for 6 hours. That silence was louder than any ringtone. They walked back to their trucks. Sullivan's phone rang. He answered without looking at the screen. Captain Sullivan? Speaking. This is Officer Chen, El Paso Police Department. Alex Morrison asked me to contact you. He wanted you to know that his parole hearing was approved. He's being released tomorrow morning. Sullivan felt something loosen in his chest, a knot he hadn't realized was there. Thank you for letting me know. There's more, sir. Alex wanted to thank you, said to tell you that for the first time in 35 years, he feels like he has family. The line went dead. Sullivan stood there holding his phone, staring at nothing. Bull walked over. Good news? Alex gets out tomorrow. He's coming home. Home where? He doesn't have a home. Sullivan looked at Bull, then at Wrench. An idea forming. Crazy maybe, but crazy was all they had left. What if we gave him one? 2 weeks later, Sullivan stood in the driveway of a foreclosed house in San Antonio. Small, 2-bedroom, needed work. The bank was practically giving it away because the foundation had cracks and the roof leaked, and nobody wanted a project that big. But Sullivan had spent 40 years working with his hands. Bull knew construction. Wrench could fix anything that had moving parts. And Alex, when he arrived looking thin and haunted and free for the first time in months, just stared at the house like it was a palace. "You bought this? For me?" Sullivan handed him a set of keys. "Not for you. With you. We're going to fix it up, turn it into something solid, and when Emma comes home, she'll have a place where family waits." Alex's hands shook as he took the keys. His voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know how to do this, how to be normal. Neither do we, but we'll figure it out together." They worked on the house every day, tearing out bad drywall, replacing rotten boards. The physical labor was hard but good, the kind of tired that came from building instead of destroying, from creating instead of surviving. Bull taught Alex carpentry: measure twice, cut once, square your corners, take pride in the work even if nobody sees it but you. Wrench taught him plumbing and electrical: respect the systems, understand how things connect. Everything works together or nothing works at all. Sullivan taught him patience. Rome wasn't built in a day, neither are lives. You start with foundation, build one piece at a time, trust the process. At night they ate together, pizza or Chinese food or whatever could be delivered, sitting on the floor because there wasn't furniture yet, talking about nothing important and everything that mattered. Alex slowly opening up about the years in prison, the addiction, the anger, the way he'd blamed himself for Morrison dying because somewhere in his child brain, he thought if he'd been better, his dad wouldn't have left. Sullivan told him this truth, all of it. The friendly fire, the guilt, the promise they'd broken. Alex cried, not the angry tears of a man looking for someone to blame, the healing tears of a son learning that his father had been human, flawed, but loved. 1 month after Emma deployed, Wrench's phone rang at 2 in the morning. He answered already knowing what the voice would say. "She's gone, I'm sorry. Maria passed 20 minutes ago, peaceful, in her sleep." Wrench thanked the nurse, ended the call, sat in the darkness of the hotel room and felt the weight of the world pressing down on him like 61 years of gravity, finally collecting its debt. Sullivan and Bull found him at dawn. Wrench was sitting on the edge of the bed, Maria's last letter in his hands, the one she'd given him before he left. He'd never opened it, afraid of what it might say, afraid it might be goodbye. Bull sat down beside him, put an arm around his shoulders. "Read it, brother. Whatever it says, we're here." Wrench's hands trembled as he opened the envelope. The letter was short. Maria's handwriting shaky but clear. "Victor, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you're still there, and that's okay. I never wanted you here watching me fade. I wanted you out there keeping promises, being the man I married. You think you failed Morrison, you think you failed Alex, but you didn't fail me. 41 years and you never once made me doubt I married a hero. Now go finish what you started. Give Emma what Alex never had. Give that family the father figure they deserve. And when you're done, when you've kept every promise and helped every person you can help, then you can rest. I'll be waiting. I always waited. I always will. All my love, Maria." Wrench folded the letter carefully, put it back in the envelope, stood up and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I need to go home, handle the funeral, get things settled. We'll come with you." "No, you stay here, finish Alex's house. I'll be back in a week." He wasn't back in a week. He was back in 4 days. Thinner, older, but steady. He walked into the construction site where Sullivan, Bull, and Alex were framing a new wall. "Maria's buried, house is sold. Everything I own fits in my truck. I'm staying here with you idiots because family doesn't leave family." Alex dropped his hammer and hugged Wrench, just grabbed him and held on like a man who'd spent his whole life without an anchor and finally found one. The house came together, slowly but surely. Walls went up, roof got patched, plumbing worked, electricity flowed. They painted the bedrooms, installed cheap furniture, made it livable, made it home. 3 months after Emma deployed, Sullivan got an email from her, the first communication since she'd left. "Captain Sullivan, I can't say where I am or what we're doing. OPSEC, but I want you to know the training saved my life. 2 weeks ago, we took contact, real contact. Everything you taught me came back automatic. My crew is alive because of you. Tell Dad I love him. Tell him I'm proud to be Morrison's granddaughter. Tell him I'll be home soon. Thank you for keeping the promise. Emma." Sullivan read the email 5 times. Then he walked into the living room where Bull and Wrench were teaching Alex how to use a power drill and showed them the message. Bull grinned. "Damn right we trained her good." Wrench just nodded, but there were tears in his eyes, good tears this time. 4 months after the deployment, the news broke. Russian forces crossed into Ukraine. The training mission in Poland became something else. Something that had young soldiers like Emma sitting in tanks on the border, watching the horizon, waiting to see if the war would spread west. Sullivan couldn't sleep. Spent his nights watching news coverage, tracking reports, the old instincts kicking in, planning, calculating, worrying. Tyler called, his grandson's voice tight with concern. "Grandpa, are you okay? You sound stressed." "I'm fine, just keeping track of some friends." "Is this about the woman soldier you've been helping?" "Emma?" Sullivan was surprised. "How did you know about that?" "You talk in your sleep sometimes when I stay over. You say names, Morrison, Emma. Promise." Sullivan sat down, realized he'd been standing for 3 hours, pacing like a caged animal. "Yeah, it's about Emma. She's in a dangerous place, and I can't help her from here, and it's driving me crazy." Tyler was quiet for a moment. "Grandpa, when I was little and scared of the dark, you told me that brave people aren't the ones who aren't afraid. They're the ones who are afraid and do it anyway. You taught her to be brave. Now you have to be brave enough to trust that she'll remember." Sullivan felt his throat tighten. When had his grandson gotten so wise? "When did you grow up?" "I had a good teacher. 6 months after deployment, Alex's house was finished. They stood in the driveway looking at it. Fresh paint, new shutters, landscaping that was more dirt and hope than actual grass, but would grow given time. Alex turned to the 3 old men who had become his family. "I don't know how to thank you." Sullivan shook his head. "You don't thank family. You just show up when they need you. Like we should have shown up for you 33 years ago." Bull clapped Alex on the shoulder. "Besides, we needed the project. Gave us something to do besides sit around getting old." Wrench smiled. "Now we just wait for Emma to come home. Then the family's complete." But Emma didn't come home. Not yet. The situation in Europe got worse. The training mission extended. 6 months became 9. 9 became 12. Reports filtered back through official channels and unofficial networks. Emma's unit had seen action. Light contact. Skirmishes with forces that weren't supposed to be there. Nobody was calling it war, but it walked like war and talked like war and bled like war. Sullivan got an email from Emma's commander, Captain Reeves. He'd tracked down Sullivan through military channels, wanted to thank him personally. "Captain Sullivan, your training of Specialist Morrison exceeded anything we could have provided. Last month, her tank took an RPG hit. The impact damaged the fire suppression system and started a blaze in the engine compartment. Morrison kept her crew calm, executed emergency procedures perfectly, got everyone out alive before the ammunition cooked off. Her tank was destroyed, but her crew survived without serious injury. She's being recommended for an Army Commendation Medal, but more importantly, she's being recommended for a promotion to sergeant, the youngest in her battalion. I wanted you to know that whatever you taught her, it worked. She's the kind of soldier who makes everyone around her better. Thank you for your service, both then and now. Captain James Reeves." Sullivan showed the email to Bull, Wrench, and Alex. They read it in silence. When they finished, Alex's hands were shaking. "She survived. Emma survived because of you." Bull wiped his eyes roughly. "That's what we do. We keep people alive." 14 months after deployment, Sullivan got the call. Emma was coming home. 2 weeks. Her unit was rotating back stateside. She'd have 30 days leave before reassignment. Alex went into a panic, cleaning the house top to bottom, buying furniture, trying to make everything perfect. Sullivan found him at midnight, scrubbing the kitchen floor that was already clean. "Alex, stop." "But what if she doesn't like it? What if it's not good enough? What if she thinks I'm not good enough?" Sullivan knelt down next to him, took the scrub brush from his hands. "You're her father. That's enough. That's everything." Alex looked at him with eyes full of fear and hope. "What if I mess it up? What if I don't know what to say?" "Then you mess it up. Then you don't know what to say. But you show up anyway. That's what family does." The day Emma came home, they all drove to Fort Hood together. Sullivan, Bull, Wrench, and Alex. The reunion was at a hangar on base. Families everywhere, signs and balloons and tears, the smell of anticipation thick in the air. The buses arrived. Soldiers started filing out, loaded down with duffel bags and weapons cases. Young faces marked by things they'd seen, things they'd carry forever. Emma emerged from the third bus, still small, still slim, but different somehow, harder, older. A warrior coming home from war, even if nobody was calling it war. She scanned the crowd, found Alex first. Their eyes met across 50 yards of concrete and crying families. For a moment, neither moved, just looked at each other, father and daughter, strangers in blood. Then Emma dropped her bag and ran. Alex ran too. They collided in the middle of the hangar, holding each other, both of them crying too hard to speak. Sullivan, Bull, and Wrench watched from a distance, giving them space, giving them the moment they'd both been robbed of for too many years. Bull's voice was gruff. Morrison would be proud. Wrench nodded. Maria, too. Sullivan felt something in his chest. Not quite pain, not quite joy. Something between grief and gratitude. The weight of a promise kept. The knowledge that some debts can be paid even if you're 33 years late. Emma finally let go of Alex, turned and saw the three old men standing there. She walked over, still crying, mascara running, looking like hell and like an angel at the same time. She didn't say anything, just grabbed Sullivan in a hug that nearly cracked his ribs. Then Bull, then Wrench, holding each of them like they were the only real things in a world that had stopped making sense 14 months ago. When she could finally speak, her voice was thick. You saved my life. Everything you taught me, it all mattered. Every single thing. Sullivan smiled. You saved your own life. We just reminded you what you already knew. Emma shook her head. No, you gave me something I didn't have. Family. People who gave a damn if I lived or died. That's what got me through. Knowing that somewhere 3 crazy old men were waiting for me to come home. They took her to Alex's house. Emma walked through the room slowly, touching walls, looking at the furniture. The photographs Alex had hung, pictures of Morrison, pictures of Emma as a child, the life that should have been. She turned to Alex. You did this? You built this? He nodded, unable to speak. Emma looked at Sullivan, Bull, and Wrench. You helped him, every day, for 6 months. She walked to the back bedroom, the one they'd prepared for her, simple, clean, a bed, a desk, a window that looked out on the small backyard. On the desk was a photograph in a frame, the original, 4 men and a tank, Morrison, Sullivan, Bull, and Wrench, young and strong and alive. Next to it was Morrison's combat journal, the one Alex had kept in all these years, and a folded flag, the one they'd given Morrison's widow at his funeral, the one Alex had carried through prison and addiction and every dark place he'd been. Emma sat on the bed, picked up the journal, opened to the last page, read her grandfather's final words. Feb 26, 1991. If I don't make it tomorrow, Sullivan, Bull, Wrench, the T-72 intel is in locker 19, Fort Hood. Make them pay. She looked up at Sullivan. Did you? Make them pay? Sullivan sat down beside her, told her the rest of the story, about Morrison stealing the T-72, about the evidence he'd been carrying, about the friendly fire that wasn't friendly at all, but orders from men who wanted secrets buried. We never found the locker, never got the evidence. Your grandfather died trying to expose something, and we failed him in that too. Emma was quiet for a long time. Then she stood and walked to her duffel bag, pulled out a small metal box, set it on the desk. When my tank got hit and we evacuated, I grabbed everything important. My rifle, my vest, and this. I found it 3 months ago during a maintenance inventory. Old storage locker on base. Number 19. Nobody had opened it in 30 years. Sullivan's hands shook as he opened the box. Inside was exactly what Morrison had died protecting. Hard drives, cassette tapes, documents, proof of corruption and betrayal, and all the ways good men get sacrificed on the altars of profit in politics. Bull looked at the contents. What do we do with it? Emma smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was Morrison's smile. Wrench's determination. Bull's fury. Sullivan's justice. We finish what my grandfather started. We make them pay. 1 week later, Sullivan sat in a conference room at the Washington Post. Across from him sat 2 investigative reporters who had spent their careers exposing government corruption. On the table between them was everything. Morrison's evidence, Emma's testimony, official documentation of the friendly fire that wasn't friendly. The reporters listened, took notes, asked hard questions. When Sullivan finished, the senior reporter leaned back in her chair. This is going to destroy careers, maybe bring down companies. Are you sure you want this public? Sullivan looked at the photograph he'd brought. Morrison, young and alive and believing the world was worth fighting for. It's 33 years late, but yeah, I'm sure. The story broke 3 days later. Front page. Above the fold, documentation of defense contractors selling weapons to both sides. Evidence of officers silencing whistleblowers. Proof that good men died not for freedom or democracy, but for quarterly earnings reports. The fallout was immediate. Congressional hearings, FBI investigations, retired generals brought in for questioning, corporate executives hiring lawyers and throwing each other under buses. Sullivan watched the news from Alex's living room. Emma sat beside him. On the other side, Alex. Behind them, Bull and Wrench. Tyler had driven down from San Antonio, wanting to be there for his grandfather. This is what Morrison died for, to stop this, to expose this. Emma nodded. He didn't die for nothing. No, he didn't. 2 months after the story broke, Sullivan got a letter from the Department of Defense. Official letterhead, formal language, an invitation to a ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery. Captain David Morrison was being posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for extraordinary heroism in the face of enemy forces and corruption within his own command structure, for giving his life to protect the truth. The ceremony was on a cold morning in November. Gray sky, wind that cut through dress uniforms and civilian coats alike. A small crowd gathered at Morrison's grave. Emma in her dress uniform, Alex in a suit that Sullivan and Bull had helped him pick out, Tyler standing tall beside his grandfather. A 3-star general read the citation, spoke about Morrison's courage, his sacrifice, his unwavering commitment to doing what was right, even when right meant death. Then he presented the medal to Emma. Not Alex, Emma. Morrison's legacy, the soldier who had carried his blood and his values into a new war and come home alive. Emma accepted the medal with parade ground precision, but when she turned away from the general, she walked to Alex, took the medal from its case, placed it in her father's hands. This is yours. He was your dad. You carried his memory when nobody else did. You deserve this. Alex's hands shook as he held the medal. The highest honor a soldier can receive. The recognition that Morrison had died a hero, not a mistake. Sullivan, Bull, and Wrench stood at attention, 3 old men in civilian clothes, backs straight despite the pain, saluting the grave of the friend they'd failed and finally made it right. The ceremony ended. People dispersed, but the 5 of them stayed. Sullivan, Bull, Wrench, Alex, Emma, Tyler standing with them. 3 generations. Blood family and chosen family and the family you build from broken pieces. Emma spoke first. What happens now? Sullivan smiled. Now we live. We take care of each other. We show up when it matters. We keep the promises we can keep and forgive ourselves for the ones we couldn't. Bull nodded. And we teach Tyler everything we taught you, because this family's growing and the tradition continues. Tyler looked up at his grandfather. You want to teach me to be a tank commander? Sullivan put his hand on the boy's shoulder. I want to teach you to be a man who keeps his promises. The tank commander part, that's just details. They walked back to their cars together. The November wind followed them, cold but clean. Behind them, Morrison's grave stood quiet in the gray light, a headstone marking the resting place of a hero. But more than that, a marker for the beginning of something. A family built from steel and fire, and promises kept too late, but kept nonetheless. 3 weeks later, Sullivan stood in Alex's backyard. The grass had grown in, green and thick. They'd built a fire pit, installed a grill, made it a place where people could gather. Bull was manning the grill, cooking burgers with the same precision he'd once used to fire tank rounds. Wrench was teaching Tyler how to change the oil in a lawnmower. Alex and Emma were inside, cooking sides, arguing about whether potato salad needed pickles or if that was an abomination. Sullivan's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. Captain Sullivan? Speaking. This is Colonel Martinez from Fort Hood. I wanted to inform you that Emma Morrison has been accepted to officer candidate school. She starts in January. She listed you as her sponsor. Sullivan felt pride swell in his chest. She'll make a hell of an officer. The best ones always do. I also wanted to say thank you for what you did, for Morrison, for Emma, for showing that promises matter even when they're decades old. Just keeping a promise, Colonel. That's all any of us can do. The call ended. Sullivan walked back to the fire pit. Emma came out carrying a bowl of potato salad. With pickles, Alex followed with plates and napkins. They ate together as the sun set, talked and laughed and told stories. Bull recounted a mission from Desert Storm. Wrench told jokes that weren't funny, but made everyone laugh anyway. Emma described Poland in winter. Alex talked about his new job at a veterans support center, helping other soldiers transition home. Tyler asked questions about war, about tanks, about what it meant to be brave, And the four old soldiers answered honestly, without glory, without lies, with the truth that service was hard and scary. And sometimes it broke you, but it was worth doing anyway, because some things mattered more than safety. When the night grew late and the fire burned down to embers, Emma stood, raised her beer bottle. To my grandfather, David Morrison, who taught us all that doing the right thing is worth any cost. Alex stood, raised his bottle. To the Steele brothers, who kept a promise that took 33 years but finally came true. Sullivan stood, raised his bottle. To Maria, who understood that some men need to keep promises before they can rest. Bull stood, raised his bottle. To every soldier who didn't make it home, we carry you forward. Wrench stood last, his voice quiet but strong. To family, blood and chosen, the only thing that matters in the end. They drank. And in that moment in a backyard in San Antonio, a story that started with death and guilt and broken promises found its ending in life and redemption and family forged from fire. The night was quiet. Stars emerged overhead. And if you listened carefully, you could almost hear the rumble of tank engines in the distance. The sound of Steele brothers rolling forward. Together, always together. Because some promises don't have expiration dates. Some debts get paid, even if it takes decades. Some brothers never stop being brothers, even when one of them is gone. And some stories don't end. They just find new chapters, new generations, new Steele brothers to carry the tradition forward. Sullivan looked around the fire at the faces illuminated by dying embers. Bull and Wrench, Alex and Emma, Tyler, the family he'd built from the wreckage of the past. And he smiled. Because this was worth everything. This was the promise kept. This was home.